hyper focus on client outcome, I thought was like surprisingly like a huge light bulb moment for me. I found 90DP. I definitely was the one that pushed for it. Um, Largely because we had been pivoting so much. Pre-pandemic, we had a whole kind of narrative around what we were offering, and then the pandemic hit and we took a complete 180 to just like offering like Zoom, like helping people, like hand-holding people to set up Zoom calls and remote tech support and just indoor air quality and air, like selling air filters and things like that. Just took a complete 180, rebuilt the website, everything, dumped everything into that trajectory, really heavily pursued like the WELL building certifications and things like that, the healthy building movement. And then once things started kind of stabilizing or normalizing after the pandemic, we were left with like, okay, like picking the pieces back up. What do we want to pick up from our original kind of concept of what Techmenity was, because it was a young company before COVID, and then what's still relevant from kind of the COVID pivot. And I was getting so much kind of siloed information or different like narratives and storylines from everybody on the team, and everybody was talking about the company differently. And we really had no kind of cohesive strategic vision of like where we were going and who we were and what our services were. So I felt like, being the only person on the marketing and communication side, I was like, I need support, and I need like buy-in and backing from my team to say like, yes, this is the story that we want to tell. So I was the one that really pushed for the 90DP program. And then again, from the org structure side, we had a lot of change happening. People that had been with the company for a long time were leaving, and we had a lot of gaps to fill, and we just really needed some kind of cohesion. So I think that was the main impetus for me. And the team was 100%, like once I told them, like gave them my pitch why we needed it, everybody agreed. The hyper focus on client outcome, I thought was like surprisingly like a huge light bulb moment for me, because I think because we had been coming through this kind of evolution of like who we are, what do we do, what do we offer, we were so focused on our process and our services and what it was that we were selling, that we hadn't really looked at the client or the partner to say, okay, well, why do you need us? Why are you coming to us? Like, what pain points are we solving for? So I think that was so simple, but such a big shift in the way that we were talking about our services. So I would say that was probably the biggest takeaway for me. And I've been able to apply it honestly to my other projects and the way that I talk to my clients as well. Like it's so applicable. It seems so obvious once you realize it, but that was a big shift for me. Kind of coming from like an empathy narrative where you can really put yourself in either the partner or the client's shoes and say, like, this is what I'm struggling with. This is the walls and the roadblocks that I keep hitting. Like this is what's putting us over on our timeline every time, or over budget. So I think really being able to like empathize with the client. And then also, since we're in the technology space and the smart building space, so much of what we push is our like deep understanding of the end user experience. And we weren't really talking about that. We were talking so much about our process, but we weren't showing people that like what really matters is that when, you know, the CEO walks into their boardroom, that they can get their video conferencing up without having to like call the IT department, you know, or the building manager can see everything, all of their like systems on one touchscreen panel and like how much time that really saves people on a day-to-day basis. We weren't really talking about those things directly, and just being able to show people like, we know how frustrating technology can be when it doesn't work. And that is why we focus on always keeping end user in mind when we're thinking early stage pre-planning. You have to have somebody at the table that's always thinking about how it's going to function. Making sure going into it that you know how you're going to restructure your schedule to prioritize these meetings, because if you're not allocating that hour or those hours every week, inevitably something's going to come up and you're going to skip because you need to work on X project. So I think giving, like, kind of padding some time in your schedule and using it also. At the beginning, I did a really good job of like using the 90DP meetings as a way, as like a kind of a deadline for myself. So I was able to say, like, kind of compress my productivity window. So I knew that I only had 2 hours in the morning to get these 3 tasks done, because I had a hard stop at 11 for the call. Once I kind of let that slip, then it made it a lot harder for me to prioritize the calls, because I was letting my kind of time blocks like leak into each other. So I think that would be, just from a very practical standpoint, like really get your schedule tight so that you can make it to the meetings. And then if you're joining as part of a team, getting really clear on who's responsible for what, and like who's going to be going to which meetings, and where you need your other team members to show up. I think having kind of that discussion ahead of time would be really helpful. I felt like I was one of only a few people who were a part of a larger team. I felt like most people were joining kind of as either a sole proprietor or, you know, an individual consultant, versus like representing like the marketing department from a larger team. So I think that was challenging to try to get accountability from my other team members so that I wasn't the only one kind of shouldering the load.